Yes, sir.
On the subject of Reagan, since I was born after he came and went through the presidency, can you give me a snapshot of what America looked like under Reagan?
I can, but I'd be giving you the wrong snapshot because, like you, I wasn't born when Reagan was president. I was born in 1959, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't have a clue. I was a theater major at the University of Florida on the night that first November in 1980, and I was Fritz will remember this because Fritz was there, not at the same show, but I was in the only. I've only been in 2 plays in my life, and I was playing Tony Kirby and You Can't Take It With You at Gainesville Little Theater. Great little theater in Gainesville. I went to hold hands with this girl who wanted me some support during the audition. There were 75 women and 2 men, and they said, "Would you mind reading this part?" I said, "I'd be happy to." I got the part. She didn't. That was the end of that. But to answer your question, I started out wanting to be a fighter pilot and shoot down communists. It's a worthy goal. But next thing I know, I'm surrounded by people who were just theater people, and everything was emotion, and they didn't have, as I've said 100 times, I passionately believed in things I knew nothing about. I thought Reagan was a senile old lunatic, and I thought that because everybody told me that he was. Oh, you should see him when he's not on camera. He's just this dolt. He's just this actor. Oh, God, what a catastrophe for the country. I hope, I didn't have any clue. I didn't read anything he'd ever written. I certainly didn't know that he toured the country in the 60s for General Electric, speaking to 7 people sometimes. I've spoken to 7 people. I remember one time I spoke to 4 people in the back of not exaggerating, it was the back of a Jerry's Deli. I was up in the upper room. It was loud as hell. It was some event. I was just getting started. They weren't paying me. I was selling DVDs of What We Believe DVDs. And there were 4 people there. And I remember thinking, oh, man, 4 people. It's like, no, Ronald Reagan speak to 7 people. I can speak to 4 people. Absolutely. It's just another chance to get the message right. But he sat in his trailer and wrote about things. And Ronald Reagan did. This is the thing that's amazing about Ronald Reagan. Before he became Ronald Reagan, when he was learning how to be Ronald Reagan in the 60s on these tours, he went on these tours, and he was speaking tour for General Electric for almost 2 years. But he didn't just speak, he actually listened. He listened. He listened to people, and he listened to what they knew, and he didn't just listen to their problems like a politician. He listened to their wisdom. And I think the thing Reagan got out of that was the thing I got out of this real early, was the idea that it doesn't matter how unglamorous this particular event is. I mean, it could be guys like Bill Maher would look at the Central Wisconsin Women's Republican Committee as the squarest of the square, and you go in there and you see sometimes there have been events where people are wearing like farmers' overalls, and guys like Maher would go, these guys are idiots, they don't know anything about international relations. Well, first of all, maybe they do, but even if they don't, there's not a person in there, Bill Maher or whoever, or Michael Moore, these guys get rushed in and out of their events. There's not one person in that room, there's not one person in the room right now here, who doesn't know 100 things more than I do. 100 things, at least 100 things, maybe thousands of things, That guy in the overalls probably knows a lot more about duck decoys, or knows a lot more about how to store milk or pasteurize milk. He certainly knows how to grow food, which is a more useful thing to do than flap your jaws, frankly, if things go south. I'd rather know a farmer than know a rhetorician if the food supply is out. So that realization that the wisdom of the American people is this enormous reservoir is what made Reagan Reagan. He had the sense to listen to people, not just talk about their problems, but talk about solutions. Like what works. Well, I have a plan to do this, and well, Mr. Reagan's great idea is not going to work because here's why. And he listened. He didn't come in there. And somebody said this early in the Obama administration. It might have been Peggy Noonan, but I don't think it was. But it was somebody like Peggy Noonan, who said somebody had worked with Reagan, and they were listening to Obama speak and just basically lecture us and hector us about all the things we need to do. We need to do this, and you need to do this, and Americans, you need to do this, you need to do this, and you need to eat more and more organic foods and use less carbon and buy solar panels, blah, blah, blah. And she said, I wrote for Reagan for 8 years, and Ronald Reagan would have fired me if I'd submitted a speech telling the American people to do what I tell them. His job wasn't to tell the American people what to do. His job was to find out what the American people wanted and execute it as the chief executive of the country. What do you need? Okay, let's do that. And he was a servant of the people. That's really it. I can tell you this though, even though I voted for Walter Mondale in 1984 because he said he was going to raise taxes, see, I didn't pay any taxes. So what difference does it make to me? This is why it's so easy for me to defeat these liberals and these progressives in one-on-one debates, because I know how they don't think. Right? I know exactly how they don't think. They believe things because it seems, why are you in favor of raising taxes? Well, so all the poor people can get stuff. And you too, right? Well, okay. How much taxes you pay? None. So you're stealing from somebody, right? I didn't know that at the time, but I do now. But one thing I can tell you about, though, is because as I said all night long tonight, I never lost this this desire to be in the military, and I never lost this love of the military. And I have to tell you, I'd make a great Secretary of Defense because I actually know this stuff. I know it. I know everything in our arsenal. I know everything in their arsenal. I know how. I not only know what's in a 688 attack sub, upgraded LA class sub. I know how they hunt. I know how they work. I love it. So the one thing I can tell you about that I did watch with my eyes open was the difference in the military between Carter and Reagan. I had friends who joined the military in, I want to say, in 1979 or 80, during the Carter years when we had just gotten out of Vietnam and the Democrats had given away the deal that protected the South, so it was turned into a defeat. And nobody joined the military, and nobody wanted to join the military. It was just associated with loss and incompetence. And Jimmy Carter in 1979 tries to rescue these hostages, and we fly 4 or 5 helicopters, four helicopters out to the desert, and they crash. 2 of them crash into a C-130, I want to say it was, in that Desert Eagle, was it? And we couldn't even land a helicopter in the desert without killing 20 of our guys and leaving them there, by the way. The first thing we saw the next day was a picture of Iranian guards with bodies of American servicemen burned to a crisp in the wreckage of like turbofans and rotor blades. That's Jimmy Carter's military. And canceled the B-1 and did everything. So Ronald Reagan didn't just come in with the conservative Republican Congress to buy more stuff. Ronald Reagan started talking about America being a shiny city on a hill, and started talking about freedom, and started talking about the fact that there are people who go to bed at night who are not sure if they're going to be woken up because some guy's going to come in with a gun and take his whole family out and put them up against a wall and shoot him in the back of the head. And he said, we got to stop this. And he didn't just give the military better toys. Desert One, thanks, Foghorn. He didn't just give them better toys. He gave them a reason. He gave them a reason to fight, a reason to be proud of what they were. And I watched that military change like that. I mean, like that. People made Reagan paid a big price for Grenada. You know, I mean, Grenada is a speck on the map. As the first action with Ronald Reagan as president was the invasion of Grenada. And people made a big deal of, oh, big man, you know, you're taking the most powerful military in the world against this tiny little island. But that's not what was interesting about Grenada. Grenada was the first time that they wore the modern helmets, for example, the Kevlar helmets. Grenada was the first time things actually started to look like they were going to work. It was the time when things started actually looking like, oh, the Army and the Air Force are talking to each other? You mean they're not running into each other, literally crashing into each other? You mean you've got Air Force guys flying cover over Army guys, the Navy supplying either special forces or they're, you know, grounds, you know, they're doing artillery missions from the battleships or whatever. Everybody's working together? Yeah. The one thing I didn't get to talk about is the second part of the trip, which I kind of glossed over because the first part was so much fun. But the next day I went to, Foghorn took me to CENTCOM, which is Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base. CENTCOM used to be the rump end of military commands. It's where nothing happened, right? All the action was in Europe. We're going to fight the Russians, or have to deal with the Chinese in the Pacific, so, Pacific theater. But now everything that happens in CENTCOM. All ISIL's in CENTCOM, Iraq's in CENTCOM, Iran's in CENTCOM, Afghanistan's in CENTCOM. It's all CENTCOM. It's the center of it's basically bounded by Egypt and Israel all the way out to the stands, and it's the suck. That's it. That's what I was looking for. CENTCOM is the suck. CENTCOM is the part of the world that just sucks, and there's nothing redeeming about it. You can't count Israel as part of the operational theater, but CENTCOM is where everything sucks, and that's where the trouble is. And I got to sit in the JOC, in the Joint Operations Command or Joint Operations Center, I guess, and I had to wait in the hall for about 20 minutes while they basically declassified everything that was, because they do tours. I do pay for the facility after all. But it took them about 10-15 minutes to get everything sensitive off the screens, and then I went in, and it looked a bit like a kind of a low-rent sport book at Vegas. Lots and lots of screens, lots of desks, lots of people sitting there talking quietly, but they are destroying these people. I'm not going to tell you the details of what it was said. I'm going to do an afterburner on it. I'm going to run that script past Foghorn because I want to even though it was a declassified briefing, I know which side I'm on, right? I know which team I'm on. But I will tell you a couple things. First of all, the people were friendly. They were normal, the kind of people you just see at a Sonny's barbecue, sitting around with the family, Women, a woman major, I think, was chief of operations, and another woman in the Navy was her second in command that day, and everybody's friendly, and they're joking, they're kidding around, and then I don't want to tell you how many times a day, but it's multiple times a day, they are looking down from heaven where we live, looking down on these animals, either trying to murder hostages or gang raping women that they're going to kill or whatever, and they sit there with a general and they say, do we know who this guy is? Yes. Are we actually seeing what we think we're seeing? Yes. Are there anybody innocent sitting around? No. Goodbye. Bye now. So long. Boom. They're not here anymore. It's so bad for them now that they can't go out in daytime or nighttime, because if they leave their houses in the day or the night, they're going to turn into those infrared milk bombs. They're going to just be a little dark shape moving across a white background, and then like somebody blew up some milk. Just that's the warm parts of them going all over the countryside. And I am totally in favor of this. These are the worst people in the world. Some of these guys had to watch things because sometimes they've got, Predator is a drone. It was a reconnaissance drone. They put a couple little Hellfire missiles underneath it, but you fire 2 of those and you're out of ordnance, and you're waiting for the next drone to come on station, but you can still see what the thing sees, and they're seeing these people committing these atrocities, sawing people's heads off, gang raping women. There's nothing they can do. They don't have any weapons over target right now. But then they do get weapons over target, and then they go and they make these guys go away. And I've never been prouder of anybody in my life, ever. I've never been prouder of it. And so I'll wrap up with the Reagan thing. Ronald Reagan understood there's a difference between good guys and evil guys, and that if you are going to take young women out of a village, take them out, beat them senseless, rape them with 20 or 30 guys, and then cut their heads off, those are not the same as us. Those are not the same as the guys who are at CENTCOM. CENTCOM doesn't do that because I hung with CENTCOM. It's not what they do at night. The guys at CENTCOM and the fighter pilots and the people that launch the strikes on these swine, if we'd been sitting there in the middle of this ceremony, drunk off our butts in the middle of the night in that hangar at Knight Field in Tampa, and we'd heard an actual scream come from across the harbor where the container ship was, a woman screaming, an actual scream, there would be 16 cars doing 50, 60 miles an hour and multiple calls to the sheriff's department. Guys would be in the air looking for this. We'd be over there in a heartbeat. You don't take this stuff seriously. They would have gone over there, and I would have been with them because I'm the same kind of guy. We've gone on over there. We wouldn't have come home until we found out who was doing the screaming, right? It's not the same person. It's not the same kind of people. There are good guys and there are bad guys, and they're bad guys. And Ronald Reagan was not afraid to say it, and that's why everybody loved him, because he said, no, this Soviet Union is not just an alternate way of looking at things, and it's not just another way of getting things done. People live in misery and fear, and that's why they all drink so much. Why do you think there's such alcoholics over there? There's no hope there for those people. There's no life. There's no future. There's nothing. They're drunk because I'd be drunk too. If I lived in that world, I'd be drinking all the time. It's the only way I'd get through the day. And Ronald Reagan said, we're better than they are. He's right. We are better than they are. We're better than they are in every way. And this is the close, I think, for this. This is the thing that so interests me about this idea of happy warriors. I hung out with these guys. They're active duty fighter pilots, active duty bomber and tanker pilots. They're the most fun guys you ever want to meet. They're all family guys. They pray before dinner, We went out to Sonny's barbecue, a little prayer before dinner, We're going to have our ribs. They hang out with their kids. They go to the mall. They go to church. They have fun. They laugh. They joke around. Everybody's happy. You would think that in combat, in battle, as warriors, you would think that they'd be far inferior to young, hardened, vicious, brutal men who rape for fun and who kill people with knives by grabbing them by the back of the head and just slitting your throat. You would think that a guy who had that kind of brutality, who was so hardened to battle, who was so in love with death, you would think that kind of soldier would make our kind of soldiers, you think they clean our clocks. It's the exact opposite. It's the exact opposite. Those guys want to die, and we're going to help them. Our guys want to come home, we're going to help them do that too. A guy who volunteers to go and fight evil and who's got a family and who wants to come home, that's the deadliest soldier there is, and I ought to know because I just saw a bunch of them. And that's what Ronald Reagan did. You know, before that, the U.S. military looked an awful lot more like the Soviet military, or the Iraqi military for that matter. You know, I don't know when conscription went away. It was probably before Carter, but I want to say it was around 73, 74. It was right around Carter's time. But when I was in college, we had to register for the draft because, you know, I graduated high school in 1977. The shooting stopped in 72. So the whole time I was growing up, I was 12, 13 years old and looking at TV, and, you know, 248 Americans killed this week in Vietnam, and you know, thinking, you know, another couple of years, pal, you're going to be old enough to go. And what Reagan understood, and what's so wonderful about the military now, is these are volunteers. And I talked to some of these guys. I talked with Foghorn about this a lot. You know, when they're looking at things in real time. Take the Osama bin Laden raid, for example. We've got a house and we've got a tall guy, right? We got a house, we got a tall guy, we've got couriers coming into this house. Something's going on at this house. But we don't have a picture of Osama bin Laden with a big sign saying, hey, come and get me, you suckers, you know. We got a tall guy in a yard and a house, which is 100 yards away from the Pakistani military academy. So, if you're going to go in there, you're going to have a bunch of guys with rifles, and you're going to have maybe another 1,000 guys with rifles 100 yards away. So we're going to have to send some guys. And if we don't do this exactly right, we may lose some of those guys. We may conceivably lose all of those guys. So the point that I was discussing with Foghorn about this is, it's one thing to order those guys to go, but what they would do routinely is they would go to the SEALs. They'd go to the guys who are going to get on the helicopters with the guns in their hands. They would walk up to them and say, hey, we think there's a 60% chance that we got Osama bin Laden in this house, but we don't have 100% certainty, and we don't know exactly what will happen if these guys come out swarming. It could get a little dicey down there. And the SEALs, to a man, say, good enough for me. I'll go if it's 10%. If you think it's him, I'm going. And when you got a guy who's ready to give his life for that because he understands it, it's a different thing. It's a different kind of thing to send people like that than it is to order some poor schmuck who didn't want to be there in the first place, would rather be studying medicine someplace or poetry or whatever. These guys are warriors. They sign up for it. That's what they want to do. They're professionals. These guys, so the thing about these guys, these Air Force pilots, these are professional fighter pilot warriors. I'm a wannabe. I get to play around. I get to be seen with them, and I get to fly my little private airplane around and pretend it's a real jet. But these guys actually go when people shooting at them and they may not come back. And they volunteer for it. And they volunteer for it because they think it's important. And it is important. And that's really what Ronald Reagan did, you know. He really established the moral basis for military strength and action. And he was mocked for it by people like me. And that's why whenever I go to the Reagan Library, I go out to the back. You know, the library, the Reagan Library is spectacular. It's giant glass panels. It's the best presidential library by 100 miles. And Air Force One is there. The big silver bird of freedom is over your head. It's sitting right there. It's about to land on you. Spectacular. There's an F-14 outside, and there's all this great stuff, great exhibits. But way in the back, kind of in a corner, is a little tiny little circular thing, and there's a little pathway, and I've flown over it a bunch. The first time I took the long easy out, I took it over the Reagan Library to say hi to Ronald Reagan. It's the first flight I made when I got the plane back. And in this little area is where Ronald Reagan is buried. You can look down, you can see Camarillo and the ocean and everything. And every time I go out there, I've been asked to speak out there a couple times, I go out by myself and I apologize. You know, I apologize for being such a dick and for saying the things I said when I didn't know anything about anything. It's not like I made a reasonable decision or a reason. I didn't know anything. I was just shooting off my mouth like everybody else is. So that's what Ronald Reagan did, I think.